Welcome. You are listening to Radio Free Rhinecliff. This is Correct Me If I'm Norm. Actually, it's a very special edition of Correct Me If I'm Not Norm. I'm Andrew Schulkind. I will be co-hosting this evening with Norm Magnusson.
That's me.
That's you.
Andy, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Norm.
Yeah, so Jen said like last week or a couple of weeks ago, Andrew Schulkind wants to come in and interview you. And I thought long and hard. I thought, do I like talking about myself? And I finally decided I did. And I said, well, it'd be fine, but we could do 50-50.
All right. That sounds great. I figured I hadn't listened to all the episodes, but I'd listened to a bunch. And
you did?
Yeah. They're great.
I interviewed these guys here, Jen and Matt.
Yes, that's exactly right. You've interviewed most of my fellow, well, not most, some of my fellow board members on the Star Library board. Laura Zelicaro.
Right. Laura's amazing. I love her to bits. And I really want to get your new executive director in.
Oh, excellent. She is so fabulous.
She really is.
Reinvigorated.
I'm so happy that she got the job.
Me too.
I actually showed up during the interview process, and there was a public access at the time. I went to sort of support her candidacy because she's amazing.
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. So here I am, interview away, mister. Or as I said in the Facebook posting, bring it.
Bring it.
Yeah.
Well, first, we have to acknowledge, I was told today that Harris found out about this and was very effusive online, your announcement about the episode, and was like, this is amazing. This is incredible. Is he going to talk about fly fishing? So the answer is Harris. I don't know. It's
Harris Burkhart?
Yes.
He is effusive.
He is indeed. And that showed up in...
And I was going to ask you about fly fishing.
All right. Well, then that's good to know.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get that shout out there. We were talking a little bit before we came on air about baking, and I didn't realize you bake bread, but I know you bake pie.
I do.
Indeed. And I know you're an artist, and I know you're a very good artist. I assume you're pretty good at baking pies, too. And I would like to know which one feeds your soul more.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm going to give you a long-winded answer.
Please do. We have plenty of time.
Well, it's funny that you put them together for me because they both sort of illustrate one part of me that I came to understand through each of them. Really, I think maybe through pie baking first, but also through art. And that's sort of the gambler mentality. With pies, especially fruit pies, I mean, there's so many variables that are outside of your control that you have to try to adjust for. And it's much more of a guessing game and an art than a science. Like, how wet are the berries? How humid is it out? There's so many variables. And so it's always a crapshoot. And when the pie turns out and it's perfectly set and it's not too gelatinous and everything, I feel lucky more than skilled. And it's sort of the same way with painting or making art, because I have an idea in my head on this perfect thing that's going to result from my toil. And it's not always perfect. And, sometimes they are, and it's lovely and it keeps you coming back. And other times it's not, but, you have enough successes. And now I'm describing golf. Do you play golf?
I do not. There's enough frustration in my life.
You hit a perfect shot and 99 terrible shots, but the perfect shot keeps you coming back. So it's sort of like that with baking and art. And I feel that they're both the same in terms of feeding my soul. Right. They're creative and useful. And there's sort of like, there's that crapshoot part of it.
All right. That's pretty interesting. I never would have thought about the gambler mentality to either of those things.
Yeah. And do you bake?
I do. I bake bread, pies a couple of times a year, mostly around this time of year. And it's usually a crapshoot. You don't know whether it's going to come out perfectly or not.
And what kind of pies will you be baking?
Well, we were away for Thanksgiving, so I didn't get to bake. I'm going to bake next week, and I will bake a pumpkin pie, I will bake an apple pie, and I will do some other pie that I usually try and find something else.
Nice.
It's cranberry based
And as a bread maker, I'm guessing you make your own dough.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll use the same recipe for each of the three pies, for each of the crust?
Yeah, typically, unless there's some, I find some pie that's really interesting that has some other, graham cracker crust or something like that.
I love graham cracker crust.
Yeah.
So. I saw a recipe today for cheesecake, which I've never made.
Me neither.
And I thought, well, that's it. I mean, all that really matters is the graham cracker crust.
In it for the crust. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right. Well, good question. Do you have another, or how are we going to work this?
Well, you something you just said brought up another thing I wanted to ask you, and it was about it was golf. You brought up golf.
Oh yeah,
you're a tennis player.
I am.
And so another question I wanted to ask you what is the shot, and is it different for singles and doubles, that you love to hit more than any other? That it's most satisfying.
Oh, it's the same for both, and I'll tell you this: I grew up in a house with two kids, and my big sister's 3 years older. And my archetype, and I figured this out when I was like 50 or something. I'm like, oh, my archetype is little brother. Like, I just want to pull your pigtails. If you show me where they are, and I will pull them until you poke me. And then I'll go running, screaming, crying to mom, hey, I got poked. But there's a shot in tennis, this drop shot, that I practice and practice and practice. And it's so freaking annoying to my opponents. And it's, especially from the baseline, if you hit it just right, it just sort of floats over the net and across court and bounces out. And it's just ungettable. And it's really annoying. And people complain. And that just makes me love it even more. So that
you do it often enough that people complain.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. It's loads of fun. And do you play tennis or?
I play squash, or I did until the pandemic, and Bard shut its courts to the public.
Oh, they did?
Which has been heartbreaking, because I have played squash since college. When we lived in New York, I played 5 nights a week for 12 years.
And where did you play in New York?
Pick a court. I played on almost every court that I can think of in New York, but there's we referred to it as the dungeon, people in the squash world, because it was not in the basement of this building below an OTB shop in lower Tribeca. It was in the sub-basement of this building, and had just a fantastic court.
Now, the courts have, I'm guessing, sort of prescribed dimensions. How high is the ceiling supposed to be on a regulation squash court?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that there must be a minimum for like international play, professional play, but the front wall is, 16 or 18 feet tall, so I'm guessing probably 24 feet might be the minimum.
And did the dungeon have that?
It did. It absolutely did. So.
Well, my kid Mossy used to play squash.
Oh, yeah?
Up at the Bard courts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, for years he played up there.
I don't think I ever ran into him up there.
Gorgeous courts.
Yeah, they really are.
He even took lessons from some fella up there.
That guy, it's shocking that Bard, which people at Bard will joke about Bard athletics being an oxymoron, because I think that's becoming less true. But the squash coach there is a guy named Craig Thorpe Clark, who is world class. Like, used to coach the women's national team. Used to coach.
It might be
the
the same guy that Moss took lessons from.
Yeah,
and he was super patient.
He's great with kids. He's a great teacher.
Really nice.
And a great guy.
So, did you continue taking lessons as you were playing squash?
Some, yeah. It was super expensive to take lessons. So I was just, I started young enough, and I was in New York, and I wanted to play, and playing 5 times a week. I probably did myself a disservice by not taking lessons. But
and where do you play now?
I haven't played in the last 2.5 years.
So Bard just closed it off? No more, we're not letting them...
In the beginning it was because they were using the space for COVID-related stuff, and, like clinics and shots and I think things like that. And now I think the campus in general is pretty much closed to outsiders. So we're hoping we get it back, because it's an anomaly. Most colleges don't, my brother teaches at Amherst, and I was like, hey, can I come up and play on those courts? He's like, no, not even with me. Like, they just won't let you in. There's no community memberships or just access. It's, these kids' parents pay all that money.
It's probably easier for them to not have the general public coming in.
I think it must be, because it's got to be a hassle just having people traipsing in and out.
Yeah. So your brother, big brother, little brother?
Little brother. He's the middle of 3, so he's got issues.
So you're the oldest.
I am the oldest, and I'm trying to. I was sitting here trying to think: does my sister like to run around and pull our pigtails, so to speak? And I don't think she does. She's kind of the family matriarch. She's in charge.
Interesting. Yeah. I give the birth order stuff a little bit of credence, but then there's all these other variables.
Right.
Are you the youngest of 7 or the youngest of 2? Does it get magnified if it's just 2 and sort of like watered down?
And what's my brother and sister and I, there's 3 years between each of us. And Laura, my wife, there's 8 years between her and her oldest sister and 5 between her. So she, it was almost a different household that she grew up in.
Right. Huh. And you grew up in Long Island somewhere?
I did. East Northport, the silly name for
East Northport.
East Northport. Part of Huntington, which is sort of halfway out on the North Shore.
Oh, Huntington. I've been to Huntington.
Huntington is one of those towns where if I didn't grow up there, I would live there. It's like a really cool, it's a college town without a college. There's a really cool, upstate cinema kind of place there, and a neat little art museum and parks, and it's just a really cool town right on the water with, sailing community. And
do you still have family thereabouts?
My mom lives in the house that I grew up in.
Wow.
Talk about some stuffed closets.
That's nice. Oh, boy. And do you get back often?
No, we make her come up here.
You do?
Yeah.
Are your siblings around here as well?
Well, my brother's up in Amherst.
Okay. Right.
Sister's down in Rye in Westchester. So she, it's awfully close, not awfully close. It's close enough that she can keep an eye on my mom, and they see each other a lot more. But
And how is your mom? I mean, she must be.
She's great.
70 or
80, about to be 83, and
nice.
She's in really great shape. And thank heavens, I'll knock on my head as if it's wood. I'm just so blessed that she is still active and engaged and has really great relationships with her grandkids who all know her well. They're all close
How many
enough.
grandkids does she have?
6.
Nice.
2 and 2.
Nice. Well, good for you. Hats off. And your little sister, what does she do? The den mother.
The den mother. She was an accountant. She was a CPA, and she's maybe she has a part-time job. I should know that, I suppose. But she's got kids. And one of them is in college now, but the other is still in high school. So she's a tennis player and a volunteer and a mom. And rebuilding a house that got flooded in Rye that, they for the 3rd time, and it finally didn't just fill the basement, it got into the first floor. So they lifted the house like 16 feet to be able to work under it. And now they're lowering it, and I think it'll be up, I don't know, 10 or 12 feet.
Wow.
It's just remarkable. She's got these
That's
time-lapse
amazing.
videos.
They should just build another floor while it's up like that.
Well, they had to redo the foundation because it's, I guess, sort of a 1930s brick colonial. They're like, the foundation is just stone.
Is it on the side of a hill or something?
No, it's right in the heart of town in Rye, and there's this creek that maybe I'm getting this wrong. I shouldn't, blame someone, but I think that it was channelized, and that Mother Nature does not like. Water's going to go where it wants to go.
Oh yeah,
and now it wants to go into my sister's basement.
as you by channelized, you mean it once went that way? And
it once spread out probably, and they're like, well, let's we can build more houses here if we just put this into a channel and make it deeper and narrow, and that just does not work usually.
And how often do you see your siblings?
Pretty frequently. My mom every summer rents a house on the Cape, and we all go up there as a family, which is getting harder as the kids get older and have other commitments and stuff. But the kids grew up knowing each other really well, so we see each other.
That's nice, knowing their cousins and stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah, my kids on my side. The kids have 2 cousins, and they're in Texas and New Mexico and wherever. One of them was in China for a whole bunch. But on their mom's side, they got a whole bunch of cousins who they get to see all the time, which is really lovely.
That's cool.
Yeah. Also, many of them also on Long Island.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Right. You did not grow up on Long Island.
I did not. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, USA.
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah.
Wow.
Great place to live, but I wouldn't want to visit there.
So you haven't been back?
I actually have. I was there last summer, and apropos my comment just then, it was actually awesome. And went through, spent a couple of nights there. So my old high school English teacher ate Skyline chili, Cincinnati chili, a whole bunch.
Oh, wow.
Went to the restaurants of my youth, and it was amazing. I'm like, what happened to this town? It's so cool and fun, and dare I say, hip.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really different.
I had a really fascinating conversation with someone I just met, sort of through a networking group, Lunch Club. Do you know that?
No.
It's a business networking thing that started. I don't know when it started, but I discovered it during the pandemic. And this guy is now living in Columbus, Ohio, where he grew up and where he left after college and came to the Northeast and, lived in New York and I'm not sure where else. And maybe something precipitated this, a parent getting sick or something. And he went back during the pandemic and he loves it, just kind of like what you just said. It's really hip. Some of the people who he went to high school with, who stuck around, who he thought you just can't, drag yourself out of the crab pot. They're there and they're doing really interesting stuff, and just better food and culture and sort of a lot going on. So it's kind of cool when those towns that whether they were that way or that was just your perception, because hey, it's where I grew up. Like, how cool could it be, right?
Right. So you left Long Island at some point. You went to a place called Bucknell.
I did.
In Pennsylvania somewhere.
Centrally isolated, 3 hours from anywhere.
That's nice, centrally isolated. Wow. And what was the town like where Bucknell was?
It was town and gown. There was, other than the university, there's Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary is right there. That's the town. And so that's the other major employer. So there's not a whole lot there. And there really aren't any other towns. I guess it's an hour north to Williamsport, Little League Baseball Hall of Fame and all that. And I don't know, it's more than an hour, I think, to Harrisburg. And, that's otherwise it's a couple hours to Pittsburgh and a couple hours to Philly.
How did you choose that place?
It's the only school I got into.
Oh.
Hanging on the wall in my brother's office at Amherst is my rejection letter, which I think says a lot about my family's sense of humor.
Rejection letter. From where?
From Amherst College.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hanging on your brother's wall. And
his office at Amherst College.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it had been saved somehow, this rejection letter.
Yeah, I mentioned my mother's very full closets.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it had been saved. And one day she came, we were all there for a holiday or something, and she came out with garbage bags or grocery bags full of stuff for us to go through and decide if we wanted to keep or not. And I was like, hey, Matt, you should take this. And
that's kind of funny.
It is kind of funny. And the kids, his kids, who are students who he's mentoring or he has office hours or whatever, he can see them looking at it and like, hey, wait a second, this guy isn't even smart enough to have gotten in here and he's my professor. Now he's like, no, read it closer. That's my stupid brother.
My stupid brother. Well, where else did you apply? Like, Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard?
Pretty much. I applied over my head. I applied to, I really wanted to go to Brown. I interviewed and went to, I don't think I went to campus maybe, but tried to, early action or early whatever they called it back then.
Right.
That's really where I wanted to go. And I was not accepted.
And Bucknell was your safety school.
Yeah. Which is now you're making me sound snotty, right? Like, because it's not a bad school, right? Like,
I know nothing of it.
Oh, yeah, it's like 3,000 kids, or it was back then, 3,000.
Well, that's a nice size.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. And so you spent all 4 years there.
I did.
And was it a good time?
It was a great time and a great education. I studied philosophy, which was pretty cool, and I was involved in a fraternity, and I learned to play squash there. And
did they have a squash team?
They did not, or I would have tried to play on it, I'm sure. But I played intramurals there and just played with people from around campus, including a couple of professors who. There's a physics professor who famously offered anyone an A and not having to come to class if they could beat him, which he knew no one was going to beat him on.
If they could beat him at squash.
Yeah.
And you did?
No, absolutely. I didn't take any physics classes.
Physics professor. That's sweet. And so you studied philosophy, and who did you like? Who were the philosophers that you were turned on to during that era where you like, fuck, that just blew your mind?
Nietzsche. Head and shoulders above anyone else. But,
and what was it about Nietzsche?
I think he gets this rap as being, this nihilistic, very negative kind of person. I don't think that's the case. I think there's much more, I don't want to say hopefulness in it, but I don't know, it's just the possibilities of what humankind can be like and how they can behave.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Certain empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely. Owning our limitations.
Uh-huh. Huh. I had, not super popular, I had a similar experience reading Ayn Rand. who, rabid sort of free market capitalist. But in terms of her thinking about human potential and what one person can do and what effects they can have on people, that really, I loved that.
I loved Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged both. Those were great.
I was watching
books.
Jeopardy the other day, and the answer, I'm trying to remember exactly. The answer was, who was John Galt? Which is the opening line of Atlas Shrugged, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how good do you think you would do on Jeopardy?
Depends on the day and the categories.
Always, of course.
I used to watch it with the kids, which was so much fun. I'm like, listen, if you get an answer correct before Daddy, and it's got to be in question form, of course, you get $1. And then eventually I was like, all right, $2. And then Alice, my middle child, started getting really good. I said, okay, back to $1.
Back to $1.
And then I was like, okay, no, the deal's done, because she would get everything. But, it's a wonderful thing when you watch it and the categories are like tennis and art.
Right.
And
unfair.
and stuff. Yeah. And when you get everything right, you just feel so smart. But it's kind of a crapshoot.
I agree.
How would I do? I don't know. I would have a blast.
I would have fun too, yeah.
My only dream is that I could say, let's make it a true daily goal.
Of course. I can't believe anyone doesn't do that.
Me neither. It makes me mad.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you watch Jeopardy?
I used to watch it religiously, and the last stretch that I really watched religiously was the woman from Oakland. I'm forgetting her name.
Oh.
She went on a really long run.
Oh, yeah. She was great.
Yeah, she was fantastic, and I thought she was really engaging. And I don't know, after that, I watched a couple more, and I just haven't watched that much recently.
I was tuned in for much of her run.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
a trans woman from Oakland.
Right.
Who was great. And I wonder what she's doing now. But she will be back. When you win that much, you come back for Tournament of Champions and stuff, which must be like huge ratings boosts.
I'm sure. And are fan pro or negative on Ken Jennings hosting?
I don't want to say he's growing on me, but he's bugging me less. Yeah.
Ringing endorsement there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I sort of wanted, a hologram of Alex Trebek or me. I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that job. That would be so much fun.
You would be good at that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it'd be great, but they didn't call.
If only you had this established a little earlier, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am happy to hear, now they renamed the studio, so it's coming at you from the Alex Trebek studio.
I don't think I've ever realized that or noticed that.
Yeah, he was just amazing.
He really was.
I thoroughly enjoyed him.
A person who was so completely, perfectly fit for the job that he had for, gosh, however many decades he did that.
Yeah, Ken Jennings was doing okay. There was another woman who was they were swapping. They were sharing responsibilities.
Oh, the actress. She's an actress, but she also has a PhD in like molecular biology or something, serious.
Yeah.
I can't think of her name, but she was really good, I thought.
Yeah, she was pretty good also.
Yeah, I liked her all right.
So you graduated from Bucknell in 4 years.
I did.
And what did you do? And 4 years that you claimed were the fastest, most ridiculous 4 years of your life. You're glad you don't have to do them again.
I am. I mean, my liver is glad I don't have to do them again, I think. It was, we had fun. We had fun. Living in a fraternity house when beer was on tap 24/7, which is probably not the case anywhere in the country anymore. Certainly not in most places because it's such a liability. And it promotes bad behavior, and there was a lot of that bad behavior. And, it was just, we had a lot of fun. And, partly it was... a weird in loco parentis kind of thing that the university was doing, right? They turned a blind eye to all that kind of stuff,
right,
as long as you didn't go off campus and create trouble. And there were 2 bars in town, and you really were not going to get in there unless you were 21 and had, legitimate ID, even though it was probably a lot easier to create fake ID back then. It just wasn't going to happen. And if you tried, they were really going to crack down on you. And that was it. There was no real social life other than the fraternity houses. And there were, I don't know what percentage of kids were in fraternities and sororities, but it was very high. And that was it.
And what was your fraternity like? I went to SMU in Dallas. They had fraternities.
Right.
And, there was sort of the Texan fraternity, the redneck fraternity. There were the nerd fraternity. There were the stoner fraternity and so on.
We were probably a step down from the really cool preppy kids, or preppy kids who thought they were the coolest kids. And there was a football house and another football house, and then a handful of us in the middle, who we had a really good time, and we didn't. There was the lacrosse house, and lacrosse and soccer guys who were just absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But it was 120. So I was the president. You mentioned earlier I was the president of that fraternity when I was a junior, and it was my job to try and every weekend there are 120 guys doing their level best to get arrested, and my job was to try and keep that from happening. Right? Like that's how you looked at it.
That sounds like a terrible job description.
It was a terrible
in college.
job, absolutely.
And you were president for 1 year or a couple of years?
Actually, no, one semester. I guess okay. One semester was junior year.
So when you look back on your college and your fraternity life, do you have any regrets?
Do I have any regrets? I don't think so. Youth is wasted on the young. I probably would have gotten more involved in more things that interest me now. There was, outdoor clubs and, fishing. It's on the banks of the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania. So.
And you were not a fisherman at that point in time?
I was not, no.
Well, how did you become a fisherman, a fly fisherman? Fly fisherman,
yeah. So we lived in New York and had a weekend place in the Catskills in Margaretville. Actually, we were in the greater Margaretville metropolitan area, because we were on the other side of the mountain, closer to New Kingston. For anyone out there who's listening who knows that area, and we moved. We lived in an apartment in New York City that is absolutely Exhibit A in the argument against rent control. It was like every 18 months, the ceiling in the bathroom would collapse because there was a leak 2 or 3 floors up or something. And it was a great place. It was $700 a month for a 2-bedroom.
Where was it?
83rd in Amsterdam. So it was just a fantastic apartment. And Laura moved in there with me when we started dating. And but she moved in under with the proviso that we would take the money that we were spending on her apartment in Norwalk, which we referred to as our country place, even though it looked out over the parking lot of the complex and this fantastic Greasy Spoon Diner on Main Street in Norwalk. And we bought this place in Margaretville before we were married, which now, being a parent, I understand my father-in-law's great consternation at that development, but everything worked out. And so that apartment was just such a disaster in so many ways that Laura's like, we are not raising a child here. So we moved up there full time. We literally left Columbia Presbyterian Hospital with the baby, put her in the car, and drove upstate. And she never lived in that apartment. We visited plenty of times.
And never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, we kept the apartment for a bunch of time because my office was still in New York back then. And so we did all that.
And so were you working remotely, or did you go into the city for...
No, I was working remotely 3 days a week, and I would go down Tuesday morning and come home Wednesday afternoon and, try and gang up all my meetings in those couple of days. But it was, I don't know anyone who was working remotely earlier than I was.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said your father-in-law's consternation, you guys buying real estate together before you were married. What were his reservations about that?
You're putting the cart before the horse here, aren't you, there, Andrew? was, I think, the first thing he said.
Yeah.
And, he's not wrong, because our lawyer, this country lawyer that we hired up there was like, guys, this basically means you're married now. I'm like, oh, okay, yes, it does, because we own, I don't know what there's a legal phrase for joint tenants with the right of survivorship or something crazy like that about how, you own property.
I think it's a real estate legal phrase.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So anyway, we moved up there, and Laura, I think Laura will tell you that I was so freaked out about having this very small thing in our house that seemed very easy to break, and that we were the two people responsible for not breaking
this
it.
Your
this
first
is our child,
child,
yes. And I was like, I got to get out of here. So I started fishing, and the Catskills are, the birthplace of fly fishing in the United States.
Are they?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, that it is so rich in history of fly fishing, and the streams up there are fantastic, even with how much they've been degraded over time by population growth and climate change or whatever else. It's still fascinating, just fantastic fishing, right? And Margaretville, right there in Margaretville, they're not great streams, but that's where I learned. And
what was the name of the stream there?
It's the Upper East Branch of the Delaware River.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so.
And then just outside of Woodstock is the Esopus, which is
where I fish now, mostly because it's the closest real water, or good trout water to where we are here in Rhinebeck.
And do you tie your own flies?
I do. I picked that up just a couple of years ago, thanks to Maureen Terranova's dad, Bill Shaw. He volunteered to put together to do an exhibit at the Rhinebeck Science Foundation Discovery Festival one year, and he was looking for volunteers. And I said, well, I know a little about fly fishing, so I'll do this. And he was a really good teacher and just such a great guy. And so he taught me, and I took some classes over at Kenco over in Kingston.
Right.
And I've been doing it ever since.
And you got the bug.
I got the bug,
so to speak.
Yeah. And
so when you're tying a fly, I mean, it's mostly feathers, it seems, that are getting lashed into place.
Feathers and fur is a classic combination, but now there are all sorts of synthetic materials as well.
So do you get like a package in the mail of feathers and fur and synthetic stuff, and you sort of pick and choose?
Yeah, there's all sorts of places online, and mostly online, I think, at this point, where you can go and buy stuff.
And I guess the idea would be to try to make something that looks like something they would normally eat. The trout, it's mostly trout, right?
That's what I fish for. But yeah, you can fish for a lot of different species of fish on the fly. And yeah, you're either making something that is a replica, or something that imitates a bug that a fish is going to key in on, or there's something more general that just looks generally buggy that fishermen refer to as attractor patterns. So it's like
attractor what?
Attractor patterns. So it looks like hey, that looks like something. So let's maybe I'll go bite on that.
Already, I want to make one that's just like crazy.
Well, so
huge Google eyes and.
What's fascinating is that the stuff that trout eat is typically pretty drab and boring. The stuff that salmon eat is really much more colorful. And have you ever heard of this book, The Feather Thief?
No.
Oh, it's a really fascinating book. This guy who grew up not far from here, I wish I could remember where, and there used to be a fly shop in Red Hook, and he went there as a kid, and I forget the guy who ran the fly shop's name, but he was kind of somebody in the fly tying world and helped this kid learn his stuff. And the kid, I mean, there's so many layers to the story. He was an accomplished musician, and he wound up traveling the world as a musician and wound up in London. And he went to this ornithological museum and raided it under cover of darkness outside of London. But, like, how good should security be on a museum full of birds?
Yeah.
Right. And apparently it should have been better because, like, he just, kicked in a window, went in and stole, ruined decades and decades of research and but all to feed this obsession that people have, salmon fly tyers have, with tying with appropriate materials like the old patterns are written, not just taking some, other material and dyeing it to look like that.
Right.
So,
well, he was caught, I'm guessing, at some point.
Yeah, eventually, but it took a long time.
I want to know how much success he had catching the fish with these flies he tied with the feathers of these.
I think for those guys, that's not the point. The point is just tying these beautiful creations that are so exotic because they're birds that don't exist in the wild anymore, that they're extinct. And certainly none of those feathers are you allowed to possess at all.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Huh. And what was the name of that book? That sounds kind of interesting.
The Feather Thief.
Right. What did I read A River Runs Through It, which was lovely.
Yeah.
Book about father and kid, his son, mostly, but trout fishing.
Yep.
Was a huge part of it. Read Trout Fishing in America, which was really not about trout fishing at all, except in the title. Really,
do you know the band Trout
Fishing
book in America? Did you ever listen to them with your kids?
No.
They do kids music and just really funny stuff.
And it's funny. Have you read the book?
Trout Fishing in America? I have not. No.
Yeah, Richard Brogdon. The main character changes his name to Trout Fishing in America Shorty. I think that's it.
That's fantastic.
And everything in the book is sort of Trout Fishing in America cafe. I mean, everything. It's a kooky little book. Wow. Well, so you left Bucknell Oh, wait, I wanted to ask, how did you Laura meet? You said she was in Connecticut somewhere, and you were on the Upper West Side.
We worked together. Each of our not quite first jobs out of school. So we met when we were 21 or 22, I guess.
Wow. And what was your first job out of school?
That job was Leaders Magazine. It was this publication that went to according to the publisher, the 60,000 most important people in the world. Oh. So it was closed publication. It was not a subscription. It was if you were the Pope or the Dalai Lama or the president or head of state of any major country, and
Donald Trump.
He
jockeyed to get on the subscription list.
Yeah, and it was a fascinating place to work. Laura started. She was the receptionist, and I was the assistant to this guy who ran the company. And it was 30 people in this company, and she very quickly was promoted to an assistant position in the production department, and that became her career, print production.
Oh wow!
This tiny little publication that no one has ever heard of,
Leaders Magazine.
I would be in my office. It wasn't just that he got a meeting with Ace Greenberg from AIG Group. I would look up from my desk, and Ace Greenberg was standing in front of me at our tiny little office on 54th Street in Manhattan. And he came all the way uptown. And I'm like, how does this guy do this? But he was really, really good. And Katzenberg Eisenberg and Katzen and Eisenberg, the two guys from Disney.
Eisner,
that's exactly. From all of a sudden, I looked up from my desk one morning, and those two guys were standing there. I'm like,
wow.
Yeah. So he was. There's a lot of history there, and he knew where a lot of bodies were buried, and he had deep connections with Generoso Pope. The Pope family is the family behind, if I'm getting this correctly, Weekly World News and the other checkout tabloids.
Oh, how I loved the Weekly World News.
On the refrigerator senior year in college in our apartment, there was the front page of the Weekly World News that says, "Blind man regains sight, divorces wife," and in quotes, "You're too ugly."
A perfect Weekly World News headline.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
One of my favorites ever was "Buckshot Blast Grounds the Flying Guru." It was a picture of some hovering guru. So what were you doing there at that publication? You said sales?
No, I started as the assistant to the publisher, and I wound up. He had this crazy counter trade operation where he sold advertising in exchange for goods and services, and then resold the goods and services. And I was running that operation after about 6 months of being his assistant. And it was fascinating. And I really loved that work, and I tried to stay in it. There are big companies who do this, like Exxon has a big, or did back in the late 80s, early 90s, operation where they do similar things.
What a beautiful job to have out of college, a horse trader.
Yeah, it was really fascinating.
Deal maker.
And I just couldn't find another way into it that, what I was doing was just so peripheral to the real, sort of that real kind of counter trade stuff.
And how long did you last there?
13 months.
Uh-huh. Not a super long time. Not
a super long time. Laura will tell you. So Laura and I met there, and we had a little bit of an office fling. And she will tell you that I didn't just leave the country. I left the hemisphere, both of them, northern and western hemispheres. I went to Australia after.
I was going to guess.
Yeah, there you go. So I had an opportunity to meet up with a friend of mine from college, and stayed with her for a couple of weeks in Sydney, and then backpacked around Australia for 4 or 5 months or something.
And Laura didn't mind you were staying with an old friend from college in an apartment all the way around the world?
Laura and I weren't a couple then, and we had 10 years we knew each other before we started dating.
Oh.
So
I thought you said you had an office romance.
We did.
The 13
it was
months.
Brief. It was a fling.
I see.
And then I don't know. We stayed in touch, and then we lost touch, and then we became drinking buddies, and just sort of celebrated birthdays and other things together. And at one point, I don't know. I looked up and was like, "Hey, this. What am I doing?"
Yeah. And how long have you been married?
25 years and 7 months. 25 years plus.
That's good.
Yeah.
And you said you're drinking buddies, and I wanted to thank you for bringing this drink in and being my drinking buddy this Friday night. What are we imbibing in here? It's delicious.
We are drinking what we call the Big Wolf, because we first had something like this up at the Big Wolf in the Adirondacks with Kyla and Clifford Hart, who I'm sure you know. It is rye. Tonight we're drinking Bullet Rye, which we try and use Taconic Distilleries rye from right here locally. So it's rye, ginger beer, and lime, and that's it.
It is super dang delicious. Thank you so much for bringing it in. And I'm getting a little tipsy, which is perfect for you to ask me some questions.
All right, we've covered so much ground. I wonder. Let me see if I can come up with something else that I think would be good to ask. Well, we've talked about my college career. I would tell me about you went to SMU.
I did.
Tell me what your major was and whether it's useful to you or helped you or.
Yeah, I went there because I had a really good pre-med program and a high rate of acceptance into med schools. And, and I, made 4.0 first semester and like a 1.2 the second semester.
I had a similar
which was
year.
Concurrent with joining a fraternity because, everybody was drinking and dating. And I was like, this is so much more fun than studying. But also I really, the class that I liked least was biology, because there was a lot of memorization. Like calculus was good, chemistry I loved, biology I was like, oh fuck, and I thought med school was going to be that times 100,
right.
And so I sort of thought, well, I'm not cut out for it. I probably would have persevered, but there you go. My priorities had changed in one easy semester, and it was the first time in my life really that I felt I sort of fit in. I was like in an in crowd. Like all my friends from my freshman floor like joined this cool fraternity. I'm like, okay. And I joined, and all of a sudden I was in a group of cool kids. Like, wow. And so that was an interesting thing.
So what was high school like that you didn't fit in?
I had a group of even cooler friends, but they weren't like the quote cool kids.
Gotcha.
High school was great. I had so much fun, and I did everything I was interested in. I was in theater club. I played in the golf team and tennis team. I was on yearbook staff and newspaper staff. I just did everything that interested me. And in college, fitting in, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe the cool kids wouldn't think that was cool. And so I sort of limited myself a little bit. And that's why I asked you about if you had any regrets, because I look back on that time and think, wow, I can't believe I even tried to fit in or cared to fit in, because there were missed opportunities.
That's fascinating, because I think most people, it's flipped, right? High school is where you're holding back, and you're so much more worried about what the kids who have accepted you already. You don't want to endanger that. And you go to college, you're like, I don't give a shit. I'm just going to do what I want to do.
Yeah, I think I was sort of a late bloomer. I just didn't care.
You grew into your neuroses.
Exactly. And my parents were super supportive. They're like, whatever you want to do, we'll drive you, we'll pay the club fees or whatever.
Nice.
And so, it's a time when most kids, I think, are curious anyway. And I was, and did everything. I loved it, and spent a lot of time sort of post-college, post-fraternity life, getting back to the me who's like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to try this.
Nice. So where did you spend your 20s, and what did you do?
My 20s?
Yeah.
Well, I left college in Dallas. I moved to New York City. I had a job at an ad agency in Times Square. And I worked on I lived on 62nd and Broadway, and I walked down to 45th and Broadway every day and home. And it was amazing. It was 1982, and the city was really gritty. And I had been an English major in college after the pre-med thing didn't work out. And I'd read a bunch of Damon Runyon and a lot of sort of New York-based literature. And I just loved it. I fell in love with New York City right away. Cats opened while I was there.
Wow.
And, So I spent 22 to 26 working at 1515 Broadway, which was right in Times Square, which was amazing. And 8th Avenue and 42nd Street were fucking dangerous.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't want to go there.
Right.
And then I got another job in the Chrysler Building, which was my first creative job in advertising. And it was just spectacular.
And where else did you moved around, didn't you? And working in advertising.
So I was working for this agency, DFS, and they got bought by Saatchi & Saatchi, a huge multinational advertising conglomerate. And they're based in London. And so they had this sort of like small world thing, and people from London would get transferred to New York and vice versa. And I bugged the woman in charge of that like every fucking day. Finally, she yelled at me. She's like, if you keep bugging me, I'm never sending you there. Like, all right. I mean, I caught her at a bad day. She was pissed off. And my theory is somehow that she felt badly about that. And within like 6 months, I was shipped off to the London office.
Nice.
With our friend Steve Miller, who you probably know.
Oh, wow.
Who lived upstairs from me in Whitfield Street in London, and now a few doors down here in South Street.
Right.
Back. So I lived there for most of a year, and then lived in Normandy for a year.
Very nice.
Which was nice, and then lived down under the Antipodes in New Zealand for almost a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you working in New Zealand?
By the time I moved to Normandy, I had left advertising and was working full time as a painter.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'd had a couple of sold out shows in the city in the East Village, and I was single, no kids, had more money than I needed. And that's what I was doing. I had shows in Normandy, and I was in a show in Paris, which was super fun. And I had shows down under in New Zealand, which was fun. And, that's what I did. It was a pretty good life.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks.
That's cool. So tell me, I've got a question. I'm not even sure if I can ask it in less than, 10 minutes of fumfering here. But the creative process, when you're creating art or anything, even, an episode of the show, there's this inspiration that happens. And, despite, pop culture's portrayal of art and, the tortured genius and a flash of inspiration, and it's over in a moment.
Right.
There's gestation and there's iteration, but then that is over, and then you have to execute.
Yeah.
And is that it? I have to execute now, or it's like, oh, I get to execute now? Is it all about the inspiration, or do you enjoy the execution as well?
Both. I see the allure of like conceptual art where
Right.
people just sort of write directions and somebody else makes it happen. Silhouette, Yoko Ono did a bunch of that stuff.
Right.
But yeah, the execution is really fun. I mean, I used to be more of a painter, and now I'm doing a wide range of things. And I painted animals, allegorical animal paintings. And I was never trained in painting, but I put an insane amount of detail into it, what I always called painting hairs on bears. There'd be like 5,000 or 10,000 hairs on a huge animal. And it was so beautifully meditative to do that.
Sure.
That the execution sort of had its own life and was really nice. But yeah, I like the execution, and like I said earlier, sort of the gambler's mentality.
Right.
Is this going to work out? Am I executing it correctly? But also in the execution, there's always sort of refinements to the original inspiration. Not always, but often. And that's nice to be able to be right there with it and sort of nudge the execution in a different, presumably better direction.
Does pressure grow? I'm 4,998 hairs into this bear. If I fuck this one up, I'm done and I have to throw this away? Or
no.
All right.
No, but I always thought that was one of the things that was needed to be a painter. And I taught painting way back when I lived in the city to kids, was the ability to scrap what you've done and start over again. Super important.
That's got to be a painful moment, right? There's a bit of a movement right now, like it's quit, not grit. Like you have to know when it's time to cut.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's got to be a painful moment, no matter what you're doing, whether it's starting a business or
Yeah, it's a
painting
bummer.
a canvas.
It's a
Yeah,
bummer.
of
Nobody
course.
wants to do that. But I think you've got to be willing to do that. For me in painting and for most people and probably many things.
Yeah, of course.
You spend all these hours doing it. It's like, oh, fuck, it's not turning out the way I wanted.
Right.
And you need to have the strength of character, I guess, and the dedication to your vision or the delusions that your vision is right.
How frequently is it, I'm just scrapping this versus I know what I'm doing wrong here and I'm going to try it again and I think I can get it right this time?
What was the question?
How often is it, hey, this isn't working and I just have to throw the whole idea out versus, hey, this isn't working. I'm so close. I got to keep trying and do something different.
I almost always complete the idea. I rarely give up on the idea.
Okay.
And I will change things in the execution, but I almost never don't see an idea through to completion. And, the art I make, it's like my kids, or let's say some hypothetical group of kids. Right. They have their strengths and weaknesses, and I hopefully see them clearly. And I love them all. But on some accounts, some of them succeed better, and other accounts, others succeed better. So
you brought up your kids, and I think we have in common that we both, in slightly different ways, joke with our kids about which one we love the best. Am I remembering this right?
I have told each of my kids as long as they could understand that they were my favorite. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and they are. You've got two kids. You know how it is. I mean, I love them all so much.
Right.
There are times when one of them is more trying than the others, or all of them are trying, or none of them are. Those rare moments. But yeah, they're the best.
They are fantastic.
Yeah.
How much do you regret the very brief moment in, I don't know, was it 2015 when you and I were perhaps going to be in-laws, except for the fickle hearts of middle school students?
I know, those middle school romances. I don't know what's the problem.
You sent me a text, maybe in 2015, it might have been an email, saying, I'll have the chicken. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're like, well, when you send the wedding invitation out,
I did.
I'm going to have the chicken.
I want the chicken. I don't really like fish.
Yeah. And then we went and had a beer at Grand Cru when it was still here in the village.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this was your oldest kid, right?
No, the younger one, Ella, is the same age as Mom.
Right. And you were like, oh my God, they like each other. What's going to happen? I'm like, I got two daughters older than Moss. It's going to be cool.
This is old news for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That was really fun.
That was fun.
Yeah. So, and where is she now?
Home, because I took her car to get here.
Oh.
You didn't mean that quite so literally. She is at Boulder, UC Boulder, or CU Boulder.
Okay.
She's a sophomore, halfway through sophomore year. And Boulder, I think a lot of schools do this now maybe, but Boulder, you can't be undeclared major. You are exploratory. They put you in this program where they, sort of in a more rigorous way, make you experience lots of different.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. Including, she's like, Dad, she texts me, Dad, how in the world did you study philosophy for 4 years? This makes my head hurt. Like,
Right.
They forced her to take, philosophy 101, some course. I think she's going to study sociology, but she has taken some really cool courses and, prison reform and Latina studies.
And so the exploratory thing, is it like a short semester or like a 4-week thing or?
No, it is until you declare. I think you're so freshman year and maybe first semester. I don't know if it's first semester or sophomore year. That's the deadline. By the end of that, you have to have declared your major, or the end of sophomore year. But
right.
Yeah, it's at least the year. And I think you may be right. I'd have to ask her if that there are, instead of being a semester long course, it's half a semester and then you switch to something else so they can expose you to as many things as possible.
It's such a cool idea.
Yeah, it really
you
is.
haven't figured out what you really like, but maybe we can cross a bunch of shit off the list.
Yeah, exactly. Which is super
useful.
valuable. Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to ask you about Andigo or Andigo.
Andigo. Yeah.
Andigo.
Yeah, there was a go.
I'm guessing there was a go.
Yeah.
The Andy part is you.
That's right. And the go part was my art director at the time, whose name was Nantajit Lertwarashan.
Wow.
He's Thai, and it's very common in Thailand to have these really long names and to have a nickname, which is not just a nickname, that you come by because that's what your friends decide to call you. It's your parents give you that as a short version of your name. And I think Go in Thai meant something like hippie or, bohemian or something like that.
And so you guys started a company.
Yeah.
Way back when.
That's right.
And what was that company doing? What was the idea?
So I started the company and brought him with me. He had been the art director at the company I had started a couple of years earlier with a partner. A partner and I split up, and we were doing digital marketing, essentially. CD-ROMs, laptop presentations. It was early enough that the web wasn't really being used in the way it is now. It was a couple of years in before this is like, mid-90s, late 90s. It was probably late 90s before we had built a website for anyone, and a little bit later before we had one of our own, and then we kept doing more website work. And when the search engines, Google most notably, stopped or took steps to try and counteract the people doing black hat SEO, putting white text on a white background at the bottom of a page to try and fool you into going there when you search for some other term. That's when things really came together for us as a company, for me professionally, because I am not much of a coder. I had some coding skills from very early in the industry was so immature that my partner would go out and sell and come back and say, hey, I told them we could do this. And I would spend all night figuring out how to do that, and then we'd start working on it. I'm definitely nobody's idea of a graphic designer. So I'm really, sort of a marketing guy, a writer. And so that's when that change happened in search marketing that really helped us to differentiate ourselves.
Search marketing.
Yeah. We build websites and we do content marketing. And so, we bring search marketers in to actually do that SEM work. SEO work, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And I just wrote a book. I don't know if that came up in your search or not.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that this book has been published.
And what's it called, and where can people get it?
On Amazon. It's B2B marketing for small businesses. And it has a suitably, and sort of the obligatory really long subtitle, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you search for my name, Andrew Schulkind, and small business B2B marketing, you will find it.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks so much.
So how are you marketing that book?
We have just started outreach to go on.
Who's we? Is it still Go?
No, Go passed away, actually.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. It was sort of a rough situation, but he had left me the company ages ago. He's a really talented animator and wanted to go do that, and that just wasn't the business I was building. I have a colleague who I brought in to help me market the book. She has real expertise in public relations and book marketing, and so she's helping me with that. And so we're reaching out to podcasters and other media outlets to get on shows just like this one, but talk about marketing and rather than the creative process or arcades or whatever we've been talking about.
And is that one of your Indigo's specialties, is book marketing?
No, not at all. This is the first time we're doing that. And this is the kind of thing that, we operate on very much a small agency model where if that was part of what you wanted to do, we would build your website, we would help you with content marketing strategy, and we would bring someone in to do whatever else needed to be done, whether that was video production or book marketing or public relations or whatever.
And so how many employees do you have at Indigo?
I have 3. And then I have, a stable of 15 or 20 people who work anywhere from 2 to 20 to more hours than we can count a week, depending on what projects we're working on. It keeps us
freelancers in animation
contract.
Or art direction or content creation.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. And you seem to enjoy it.
I do. Actually, just the other day, Ella asked me, well, when are you going to retire? Is there like a date that you have to retire by? And I'm like, I don't think, it used to be like 65. And, her grandfather retired like on his birthday when he turned 65.
Right.
I don't know when I'll retire or, we live a lot longer than we used to. I'm not sure 65 makes sense anymore.
Right.
I like doing what I'm doing. But, if we decide we want to, I don't know. I joked about buying a sailboat and going around the world. And Laura's like, absolutely not. So that's not happening. But
Smart.
yeah,
Pretty good choice. I saw all the movies that started like that.
They don't
None of
end
them
well.
Turned out well, no.
so I don't know what we'll do or when I'll retire. I haven't really thought about it, which I probably should because I'm getting close.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should shut down this radio show so you can go think about that.
Well, thank you.
It's been an hour.
I can't
Time
believe
has
it.
flown right by.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Norm. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. You sign us out. Tell people thanks for listening or whatever.
Thank you very much for listening to Radio Free Rhinecliff. And correct me if I'm not Norm. I am Norm. All values for Norm.
Yeah. And I'm Andy Schulkind. And it's been a blast.
Thanks, Norm.
Good
Good
night.
night.